Welcome to Foundstone Conversations, a series where we chat with industry and business leaders about what they're seeing and hearing across their sector, business strategy, connecting with their own customers, and sharing real-world lived experiences from across their career. And today we are joined by Ron Lesh, who's the Managing Director of BGL Corporate. Welcome, Ron.
Hey, good afternoon, Andrew.
Good to have you on. It's I know we've had a couple of conversations over the last little while, and it's been really interesting listening to your own journey and then how you've built the business over many years. So I thought today it'd be great for our viewers to really hear a bit more about your own career over the year, the learnings and the guidance perhaps you can give some other leaders, and then in terms of the technology and software space, what you're seeing around that from a strategy, from a culture perspective, and those sorts of things. So perhaps to kick it off, it'd be great just to hear a bit more about BGL as an organisation and where they've been over the years and where you're sitting now.
Sure. Well, BGL started before I actually joined. It started in 1983. It was started by a chartered accountant by the name of Bruce Bushby, and his plan was to try to get more value out of computer systems that all these accountants had invested in the early 80s and well, even the late 70s, early 80s, and so he wanted to help them get some value out of it. He unfortunately passed away in 1988, and I was asked to join the business in 1989 to replace him. I actually knew Bruce through the trade. We'd done a couple of assignments with clients together. He was putting in high-soft software at that stage, if anyone remembers that, and we put that into a couple of my clients, and I helped him to do that. So I got involved in the business. I had a software package that I'd written that did corporate compliance work in those days for the old state companies' offices, because it was pre-ASC, which is pre-ASIC. I got involved in that, and we commercialized it, and we started selling that software in the really the late or the early 90s, primarily when ASIC was formed, or the ASC was formed, and we had a single body nationally. We then went on to move that to Windows in 1995, and unlike today where everyone keeps people on desktops and moves them to cloud, we moved everybody from desktop from DOS to Windows, and we basically said there's no more DOS product. Here you go, here's a Windows product. And then in 1997, we developed some software for self-managed super funds. 1998, some investment software, and we've sort of gone through progressions of moving that onto networks. We've written some cloud interfaces, and then back in the early 2014, we released the cloud version of the self-managed super fund software, and about 3 years later, the cloud version of the corporate compliance, the ASIC software. The ASIC software we now sell in many countries around the world. It's multi-jurisdictional, so we've actually got a presence in New Zealand, in Hong Kong, and Singapore, and the UK, and looking at other places to take the cloud version of that at the moment. And with the super product, and I should say there's over 550,000 companies on that platform, mainly in Australia at the moment, few in New Zealand, a few in Singapore. Then we've got our super product with over 230,000 self-managed super funds sitting in the cloud, and another 60 or 70 sitting on our desktop. So overall, about 50% of the 600,000 funds that are out there are sitting on our software. And recently, we've released some investment software, which is basically the super software without the super. So we did that on the 14th of June, and we're just starting to ramp that up at the moment. So that's where we sit. We're a company will probably turn over, I don't know, $35 million this year. We've got a staff of 180. We've got teams in Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines, China, all over the place. So I suppose we're a multi-jurisdictional I mean, might even call us a multinational, but I wouldn't. I'd call us a small business.
Very good. That's really appreciate the background. And Ron, yourself, it's always really interesting to hear, you know, leaders now, you as the MD, perhaps your past. And I believe you started in the accounting discipline many years ago, and now obviously head up the organisation for many years. Can you tell us a bit about perhaps your, you know, from starting in accounting and then the change to right up to now, what you've perhaps seen even in over those stages?
Yeah, well, look, I started life as an accountant. I was working for PKF at the time, before it was PKF. I was doing audit like many people do when they come out and start their lives as accountants in larger firms. I qualified as a chartered accountant. I did a postgrad in IT. So I did all that through the 80s. Obviously, a lot's changed since then. I joined BGL on April Fool's Day in 1989. I don't know if that's appropriate or not appropriate. I took over the reins of the company in 1992, and we sort of changed what we were doing. My own journey, look, I suppose one thing I learned, I actually said this to a group of guys at lunch today, is you start learning the day you're born and you finish learning the day you die, and you keep learning every day in between. So over those years, I've had a lot of different learnings. I've learned a lot of different things. Certainly running a business when I originally did with BGL when we started, and there were 2 of us or 3 of us, compared to today is a very different organization. The one thing I suppose I've done is I've kept up as much management training as I possibly could. And I think a lot of that started back in 1995 when we went to see Jack Welch when he first came to Australia. At a casino in Melbourne, and they'd set up a room like a conference room, and Jack delivered a presentation for half a day, I think it was, and it's very interesting listening to what he said and the way that he ran GE and the things he did at General Electric, and I sort of took notice of some of those things, and you know, we sort of said to ourselves, look at, I suppose like he said, we focus on what we're really good at. If you're not number 1 or number 2 in an industry, you probably don't want to be in it. You want to make sure you're honest with your staff. You tell them where they are. You don't give them half reviews. You give them real reviews, and you treat people as individuals. And I think we've always done that at BGL. You know, we've got an incredibly multicultural workforce without planning. So we haven't said we're going to employ this many this or this many that or whatever. And we've ended up with people from, I don't know how many countries now, but from really all over the world. We've ended up with, I suppose for an IT company, it's pretty good. We're about 42% female and about 58% male, which in the IT world, I think is probably about right, maybe even higher than many. We won or we were listed by the AFR as the 6th best technology workplace to work in Australia and New Zealand earlier this year. So we must be doing something right. We got a really good team of people, lots of very good skills, lots of qualifications. We promote a lot internally. We don't go outside to get people unless it's really necessary. We don't have anybody with the skills internally to do a job. So we're probably a bit different from the way that some people operate, but it seems to work for us and has worked for us over a long period of time. You know, we've been doing this for over 30 years now. So we seem to be worked out the way to get through pandemics and get through everything else.
That's brilliant. I know just from, you know, from hearing, you know, you tell it like it is, which is very, very refreshing. Because I think there's some other business leaders out there, perhaps, you know, we've had the conversation, perhaps that are perhaps constrained for other ways and means. But I think as you talked about there, being really upfront with your staff, the good and the bad, that's what people want to hear, don't they? They don't want to hear the glossy kind of airbrushed conversation. They want to hear where they stand and where things are really at. Do you think that, you know, as an MD, you know, it sounds like, you know, you empower, you know, your staff to make decisions as well.
Try to.
Do you think, you know, looking through the pandemic, and I know that some of your engagement scores were pretty phenomenal from what we're seeing. do you think a lot of that is that, you know, you're involving your staff in most of the major decisions so they know where they're at? Is that part of it?
Look, I think, look, that's part of it. We probably don't involve staff that much in major decisions, but what we do, I think, the first thing we did when this pandemic started was we went out to all of our team and we said to them, we had a Zoom meeting with everybody. We said, look, guys, first thing you don't need to worry about is your job. You're going to have your job. We're not sacking anybody. We're not cutting back workforces. We think that the pandemic may in fact provide some opportunities for us. So don't worry about your job, worry about your health, worry about your family. So that was the very first thing we said to people. And then I suppose one of the things we've always been as an organisation is pretty, I suppose, honest. The way we've dealt with people has always been with integrity. My personal philosophy is if you screw people over, then they're all going to want to screw you over. So the best thing to do is to try to be honest with people. You can't always say yes to everything. But if you're going to say no to something, at least have a logical reason for why you're saying no, or have a reason for saying no, and at least be honest and upfront about the fact that you are. So I think that's something we've always done. With the reviews of the team, it gets harder and harder as your team gets bigger to get everybody to work the same way and provide honest reviews. And we've actually, a number of times, we've said to managers, look, you're not the right person for that role because you're not able to honestly deal with the people you've got to manage. So we're reasonably tough on that. We actually introduced Culture Amp during the pandemic. It was during, I think, May last year, we did our first survey and came back with an engagement score of about 81%, which is about 11% above industry average. Industry average for IT is around 70. We then did the same thing again about 5 months later, through the lockdowns and everything, and it came out at 89%. So we must be doing something right. We certainly listened to what people said in the first one and got our landlord off his butt to do a lot of things around the building that needed to be fixed. And because that was the main complaint people had, was that the bathrooms needed updating and just, simple things for us to do. So we just got them done. And one of the ways we got people back was we actually were in the office and we held meetings and we took them around the office and showed them all the stuff that had changed while they'd been away, so that they were coming back to something that looked new, or at least partially new. So we tried to do that, and I think that probably helped with the engagement score. I think it came back to 85% in the last one we did in March, but I'm reasonably happy at 85% engagement. When you realise worldwide engagement is about 17%, that's 17, not 70. I think 85 is pretty good. Even for the IT industry, it's around 70. So you're always building on trying to make things better for people. You want people to have ways to feed back. You want them to see that you're human. I've set a program up at the moment where I'm having lunch with everybody in the organisation over a 12-month period. So we're doing these boardroom lunches every second Friday. And just an opportunity to connect with people, talk to them, find out what they think, find out if they're enjoying what they're doing or they're not enjoying or they want to do something else. Hopefully they'll be reasonably honest. As I say to them when the session starts, it's only me in the room. None of your managers are here, so you can say anything you like about anybody. And nobody's going to feel any different about you or whatever. In fact, most of the people in the groups don't know each other, which is good. So it actually introduces people to other people in the organisation. So there's a whole lot of good benefits that come out of it. But the nice thing is I get some feedback from people and I can look at fixing things that can be fixed, especially things that can be fixed easily that I didn't know were happening. So we try and do stuff like that, and we try and do sessions for our newbies. Every about 6 weeks we have a morning tea where we get to meet the newbies. And that came out of you call it funny, but it wasn't really a funny situation where the only time that my 2IC and I were actually meeting the new people in the organisation was when we were asking to leave. So we thought it would be nice if we actually got to know them first. So we started doing this a few years ago now. So there's a whole lot of things one can actually do. I know you've got some questions coming up about it, but the whole thing about people being connected and people needing people is something we've been very, very big on through this whole pandemic, because it's one of the things that I think a lot of our business leaders have lost. You know, when I hear Telstra saying to their people, "Oh, you can stay at home as long as you want," well, how do you create a culture when people are at home? You just can't. You can't create culture over Zoom. You can't maintain cultures over Zoom. All these people who think they can have everyone working at home all the time are delusional. And they'll find out themselves in the short term that they just lose people, because you know we're actively pursuing people working for other organisations where they're all told they can work at home all the time because we know they've got no connection left with the people they're working with.
Yeah, I think those fundamentals as you talk through, and all those engagement metrics you talk through are pretty phenomenal, and especially I think in the software and tech space where it perhaps there is a culture where it's more of a churn and burn. You know, retaining your staff and promoting your staff and that engagement is huge. So, thank you for sharing that. In terms of getting a read on the market, the changes in regulation, changes in demand, and then the broader economy and society, there's probably there's still a fair few unknowns there, good and bad. From a strategy perspective, Ron, can you talk us through how you perhaps keep a live read of what's happening in the market, both your existing customers and then potential new segments you're looking at? Is there anything in particular from a strategy point of view you do or would recommend to get that live read?
Yeah, look, I suppose we keep a track of what's going on in the industry by watching what our competitors are doing, not taking that much notice, but watching them, keeping abreast of what the government is proposing around changes. We're quite heavily involved with the tax office because we do lodgements with them, with the SMSF Association because we do stuff with them, with ASIC because we do stuff with them. We're on their committees. So we get a pretty good feel of what's happening and what's coming up. I've got some reasonable connections into some of the polys. So we do also have chats to them and discussions with them. I would say that we were possibly one of the reasons or one of the people who brought to the government's attention the changes that they made in visas recently. They made it harder for people who'd come here as accountants and in IT to stay here, which is really dumb, and they've got a huge shortage of those sort of people in the marketplace at the moment. So the government just changed the visa rules a couple of weeks ago. I know that we made some representations through the polys that we're involved with. I know that the accounting organisations did the same and the IT ones did, because there's just a huge shortage of people. So I suppose that was something that we've done to keep in touch with what's going on. We try, I suppose, it's really a matter of reading and talking to people and getting out there and talking to other people in the industry. We've been around for a long time. We know a lot of people. We've got a lot of business partners. You tend to catch up with them and find out what's going on in their particular market segments. And from that, you get a view of what's going on in the market. In terms of our own strategy, we set a strategy. I was actually thinking it was probably seven years ago now when we released our cloud product and our first cloud product. And our number one objective was to get all of the people who were using our desktop software onto our cloud software. And for us, that was always our start of our strategy. And we've gone ahead from there and done exactly that. We focused on that over the last, whatever it was, seven years now. And it's worked really well. When you've got people who know you already and you're trying to get them from one product to another, it's much easier than trying to get new people. Now, along the way, you pick up the new ones as well, because you pick up the people who see what you're doing and see what you're doing on social media, and they like you and they like what you're doing, and then you pick them up as customers. You create relationships with groups. We're involved with a number of the accounting groups. We go to their events, we sponsor them, we get to sit there with the partners of the groups and have lunches with them and dinners with them and discussions with them. So you create personal relationships, and business still is a lot about relationships. Even if you're only running a call center, it's got to be creating a connection with the client. Otherwise, the client has no loyalty. So that's a lot of what we try and do is try and connect with our clients in all sorts of different ways. We do it through socials, we do it through direct emails, we do it through phone calls, we do it through all sorts of stuff. And I've got an account management team of 8 or 9 people, and their jobs is to keep in touch with our clients every day. And that's really important, especially today. Connections are more important, I think, than ever. Connections between people who are in organizations and their organizations, connection between people in the organization are really important. And that's why you just can't do that sitting on Zoom. You can't do it. I was saying to somebody yesterday, half the time we're doing meetings with people, you don't even know if they're not sitting there on their bed with their phone, and when they've got the cameras off, especially sitting on the bed and with their computers on their knees in their pajamas. I saw it with my stepdaughters yesterday. I think my wife was the first person downstairs at 9 o'clock in the morning. So they're both working from home. One of them almost all the time, the other one some of the time. But they haven't got out of bed. They might have started working, but they haven't got a normal day. At least when I'm working at home, I try and have a normal day.
Yeah, it's a good point. The fundamentals, in terms of so thank you for sharing how you've approached broader strategy in terms of the software space, because there's some of the viewers in terms of in probably the startup technology community that probably there's a lot of hype in that space, isn't there, around getting things to market and broadening and growing in a really quick amount of time. But can you talk us through your development cycle in terms of how you go and test and release across your different customer communities? Is there any kind of mindsets or guidance you'd give for perhaps smaller software organizations who are really trying to connect better with their actual customer community as opposed to just pumping out features? Is there anything you've seen, and I know you've got a pretty extensive team in that area? Can you share some of the learnings you've had in that space?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing I should say is that most of our software is driven. It was driven from 2 places. It's driven by compliance requirements for whatever we have to do to comply with whichever laws we're dealing with, and it's driven by customers. So once you've got the compliance stuff right, the way that you connect your customers to you is by giving your customers the opportunity to provide you with feedback, and then listening to it, acting on it, and doing something about it, and then going back to the customer and saying, hey, you suggested this, and here it is for you. So we think that that's pretty important. So what we built in all of our products is instant feedback. So on the side of the software, there's an up thumb. You can click on the thumb, type in your message, and that message goes back to the team. All the messages are categorized. I actually get a copy of all of them as well, so I have a look at them. From that, we determine what our priorities are, what we want to build. We know pretty quickly, clients will tell you if there's something they want and what's the most important thing to them. So, we know that, we keep a track on it, and we produce them, and then we go, but once we've produced it, we know which client has recommended it to us because it's all kept in our systems, and the client gets an email or a message saying, hey, thanks for suggesting this, we've now implemented this in the software. And if clients see that, they actually believe that you're listening to them. It's great software companies go out and they do meetings with people and make all these notes, and then nothing happens. Clients have got to see something happening. So I think that's pretty important. The second thing is you've got to keep in touch with your clients. Most software businesses are out there trying to get new sales, but they're not out there keeping in touch with their existing clients. So having an account management team to actually keep in touch with your existing clients is so important. Everybody thinks they're too small for that or too big for that, or the MD is going to do it. But, once you start to get to 50, 100, 200 clients, you can't do that anymore. You need somebody who's specifically responsible for keeping in touch with clients on a regular basis. So our plan is to make sure we actually contact every client at least every 3 months. And we've got over 8,000 clients. So it's a job for the guys. It means they're going to make 1,000 calls in 3 months. It's not that many, 300 calls a month, 70 or 80 calls a week, all doable, all possible. and that's how we get through. We get to talk to everybody. I think that's really what it's all about. I think a lot of startups miss that. They're so busy building features that they think their customers want, rather than necessarily features that their customers want. So you've got to ask the question. You've got to ask your clients, what do you want? And a lot of businesses are scared to do that too, because they think the clients are just going to bag them and give them bad stuff, tell them all the things they've done wrong. And you do get some of that, but you also get a lot of gems out of that. And by the way, that feedback mechanism, we get good and bad through the feedback. Sometimes it'll be, please add this or do this, or we need this or whatever. But other times it'll be, well, this is fantastic. I love this new feature. So it tells us we've done the things that that do make a difference to the work that they're doing.
I think that's really refreshing, Ron, because the fundamentals you talked about, listening to feedback and then going back to confirm we listened and this is the change we've made. That to build trust is huge, isn't it? Even that communication cycle. And what you said there in terms of accepting the good and bad feedback, because if you're not willing to go and ask for any feedback or any conversation, well, you're not going to hear the good or the bad, are you? So it's a good point you make, because it can be a bit daunting, can't it? Perhaps for small organizations, they're hesitant to do that. But as you say, you'd rather know what's bad so you can address it, as opposed to sitting there blindly. So
100%. We introduced Zendesk here about, I think it must be over 2 years ago now. And actually a little bit more, 2.5 years ago. The first thing we had to do was move all of our documentation out of the existing systems into Zendesk. Now, and that in itself was quite a huge job. We had to cull it and we had to clean it all up, because if we want to use the Zendesk AI and use the chat and use the preemptive answering of question stuff, we need to provide all that. Now, the nice thing about Zendesk is every time we have a call, the client gets a survey and we get a result, and that's all categorized for us and tells us how we're going. And the number of calls we're handling now through chat, as distinct from handling through talk, has gone up dramatically through COVID. I think it's 3 times what it was this time last year. And we've changed the focus of the way that our support team is working, that they are now putting more resources into handling chat. But the nice thing about chat is also a lot of people are getting the answers to their questions without having to speak to somebody. So, but it's building systems. People, someone will be starting up a smaller company. I'll say, look, I can't afford to put in Zendesk, or I can't afford to do this. Quite honestly, there's the I can't afford to and the I can't afford not to. And the I can't afford not to is often just as important as the I can't afford to. So it's things that just build your systems around your software that allow your clients to connect with you more often and more easily. And that's what it's all about. Once you've got clients there, it's no use if they're not sticky. Now, we're pretty lucky that in our, at least with one of our products, moving is difficult because there's a lot of manual stuff you got to do around it, and there's no way we can get rid of any of that. Unfortunately, we'll get rid of some of that. So moving is simple, but moving from the other products is comparatively easy because everything is online and is available external to us. So you have to give people a reason why they want to stay with you. You've got to do more than what I suppose you've got to try and exceed their expectations. Our view, our sort of thing that we started doing a while ago, and I think this came out of Simon Sinek at one stage, was it's all about creating remarkable experiences with your clients. So that's something that we focused on, the support team focused on, the account management team focus on, is let's create remarkable experiences. And remarkable for the right reasons, not for the wrong reasons. And that certainly is a focus of what we're doing. I think the other thing that I've learned, and certainly along the way, I've learned a lot. I'm a member of the CEO Institute. It's nice because every month I meet with CEOs and MDs and senior people in organizations, and we get to throw around what we're doing and what we're not doing and what others are doing. So we've got a fair idea of how things are going generally within the economy and within different sectors. But the other thing that we've done a lot of is is gone to conferences where we're going to learn more about how we can manage better. And we picked the World Business Forum in New York about 15, 16, 17 years ago now. So almost every year, once a year, we've hopped on a plane and gone to New York and spent 2 or 3 days listening to the best business speakers in the world. And you learn stuff and you implement it. And when you listen, you keep listening to Jim Collins, and he keeps telling you it's not an infinite game that we're dealing in. Or anyway, you've got your long march to get to where you're going to get to. I think it's Cynic that talks about the infinite game. You're playing the infinite game. You've got Buckingham talking about how to handle people. You've got leaders from the US. You've got ex-presidents, all sorts of people coming and speaking and giving you ideas on the way that they've done things. You just learn out of that and think differently about the way that you run your business.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. I was going to ask in terms of where you turn to. So that example of the World Business Forum in New York, I think, I'm sure that what that shows your staff and leadership that are going to those says that you're genuinely investing. You're not just trying to chalk up a course to say that they've done it. So I think that's brilliant. And I think
we send them to the one in Sydney as well.
Fantastic, because I think what stands out for me about your leadership, Ron, is it's very real. There's a lot of, dare I say, a lot of perhaps corporate drones out there. And, I don't mean that in a negative term, but it's a very kind of a real term that people get so caught up with the process and the image. And I believe that people, all different demographics and ages, are starting to see through that now. And they're wanting to see a leader who is, I know that authentic word is used too much in a buzz term, but
yes,
I want to see someone that's real, to tell it like it is, the good and the bad, so that they know where they stand. And I think that's what I see in your leadership. And I think, a lot of people can learn from that, because it's cutting through that kind of gloss and that noise has a huge impact, and it comes across in your engagement scores. So perhaps to finish on, in terms of, other MDs, software, technology and broader, when you look back in your career over the last many years, and even today looking forward, in terms of, there's still some unknowns with the pandemic and everything else that's happening in our world. Is there anything that stands out to you that where you turn for your own guidance? And then is there anything that, I know it's pretty broad, that you've kind of sticks in your mind as a big learning, or where you turn to for learning, both in the past and in the future, if you could share some of those?
Yeah, well, look, I've certainly turned to these conferences as a place to learn, and my CEO group is a place to learn. I think the one thing that I've learned personally over the journey of the last 30 years is that as a leader, or too many leaders are in the bullshit business. I hope I can say that on your podcast.
That's fine.
I learned a long time ago that it's not the answer. If you're not honest with people, and if you're not prepared to tell them, I'll give you a little example. When we released our super software to the cloud back in 2014, the software wasn't great. It wasn't that it didn't have enough features in it. It's just that the stuff that was in there didn't work well enough. So after about 3 or 4 months of seeing what a mess that it was at the time, I did a couple of things. Firstly, I told the team that we're going to have a salary freeze because we need to employ 7 more people to be able to do the role that we need to do, and we weren't going to get the revenue in the short term to cover them. We still would have been all right, but from our perspective, we needed to do that as an organization. So I went out to the team and I told them that. And then I went out to our clients and I said to our clients, and especially the ones who jumped on, is I apologized. I said, it isn't good enough and we didn't do well enough. And we've got to do better, and we've got to fix it. So give us the opportunity to fix the problem. And we did. Over a period of about 4 or 5 months, we fixed the problems. We got everything that needed to be in there operating the way that it should have operated. We set ourselves up so that we could quickly develop new features. We changed to agile development, and we've done that really all the time since we've been running the product now. So every 3 weeks we have an update of the super product. Every 2 weeks we have an update of the corporate affairs product. So what we basically said was, look, we screwed up. We admit it. We take responsibility. We'll fix it for you. How many CEOs do you see come out and just give you bullshit, excuse me, again, that same word, excuses as to why things happen, never apologize for the mistake? Well, you look at our governments. You look at the state government in Victoria, can't admit that it's screwed stuff up. It's all about, spin and more spin. And, we're not in the spin business. We're in the software business, or we're actually not. We're in the client service business. We've never really been in the software business. A lot of software companies still think that what they do is they sell software. They don't. They sell service, because software without service is useless in most cases. So we realized that a long time ago, and we focused on getting the client service right. It was always a priority for us. So look, I suppose that's some of the things that we've done. I think when you make a mistake, you've got to be prepared to get out there and say that. The other thing is that because we're not a public company, we can say what we want. We're not bound by ASX rules or by investors or by anything else. We run our own game, and we run it how we want to run it.
That's brilliant, and that experience you shared in terms of just be honest when you screw up, you make a mistake. That's what customers want to hear, and the way you're looking at, you're in the client service business. Obviously, you produce quality software, but ultimately that's what you're in, and I think that's a really good reminder to a lot of software and tech companies. So Ron, thank you very much for sharing your experience and insights. Really enjoyed the conversation. I think what you started with there, if I got it right, learning starts the day you're born and doesn't finish until perhaps our last day here on Earth. So I think that sums up, it's obvious by your mindset that, the real life, stories you've told us. So thank you again, and looking forward to hearing what happens next and the continued growth at BGL.
Thank you, Andrew.